New ways. It's my privilege to introduce this afternoon Sheryl O'Loughlin and David Bastone, two incredible people who are challenging the concomitant assumptions around leadership and business models. Sheryl O'Loughlin began her career in the salt mines of multinational corporations before becoming the CEO of Plum Organics, a startup. Later the CEO and evolutionary leader of Cliff Bar, brought Luna Bars into the world. For 2 years, she headed entrepreneurial studies at Stanford, where she was recruited by David Bastone to become the CEO of Rebel, the new #1 functional health beverage company in the United States. Sheryl is the author of Killing It, an entrepreneur's guide to keeping your head without losing your heart. And I really enjoyed kind of getting to know Sheryl both on the phone, but also through looking her up on the internet. And as I really studied her story, I became aware of how she is really the architect of her life, making incredibly bold choices. And she's constantly reimagining. We talk about redesign, and redesigning her own life as she balances being a mother, a wife, a CEO, a social entrepreneur, and a change agent. David Bastone. Those of us at Fred first met David Bastone, author of Not for Sale and managing director of Just Business at Fred Denver. It was later at Fred Barcelona that we heard the story of Z Shoes, which I'm wearing right here. The United Nations awarded David the Peace Award in 2017. He counts among his friends and admirers Desmond Tutu, Bono, Jack Dorsey, and of course, the Fred community. Please give a warm welcome to Sheryl and David.
You know Desmond Tutu?
Well, you know, they both couldn't be here. That's why they ended up with us. It's really good to be with all of you. I don't know why the Fred community becomes like my launch community. I first talked about Rebel launching this way back, and when I went to Denver, it was a very early stage company. And then, as Rocky mentioned, Z Shoes we launched at Barcelona, and then I've got more announcements later today. I get bored easily.
I know that feeling. 2 peas in a bud.
You know, the genesis of this, though, was, Rocky mentioned human trafficking. I mean, that was not my my chosen path in life, if you want to call it that. It found me. I was a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and it found me here in the San Francisco Bay Area, a restaurant that had trafficked over 500 young teenage girls from Bangalore, India, into San Francisco Bay Area for the purpose of forced labor. And when something finds you, what do? You can walk away and say, well, that's crazy. But sometimes I think life brings you questions that become a calling, and I had to do something about it. Really fast forward, what did I do? I set up a nonprofit, because when you want to change the world, you choose a business model that doesn't work. Right? Built shelters in countries all over the world, really inspiring, but after 5 years I said, what am I doing? So I'm a venture capitalist, and when I'm building the next great company, what do? I find capital, not donations. I find talent, I don't find volunteers. I mean, even today I go to Stanford or Harvard or US, these great universities, I give my presentation, oh, Professor Bastone, if I can't get a job at Google or Goldman Sachs, I'd love to come work for you. I'm like, what the hell? Why would I want you? The presumption is if you have a pulse and you want to volunteer, you'll come to a nonprofit, okay? So, and I get secondhand computers. So the idea was flipping the model on its head. And Rebel was the first company that manifested that new design of leadership and values that I wanted to put at the very DNA of a company. So we have just a very short clip about Rebel. Then when I asked Sheryl why the hell she left her retirement, was really relaxed, didn't want to do anything else, and then took on this role of scaling Rebel to the place where it is today. So we could see the film.
There's injustice happening around the world in every type of marginalized group. And I think that's probably the main thing that I focus on with the work that I do, and when I'm standing up for things or rising to certain occasions. That's sort of where I like to spend the most of my time. My name's Ruby Rose, and I'm an actor and an activist, and I'm also very proud to be welcomed into the Rebel family. Rebel is a beverage company with a really unique story. It was founded by a nonprofit called Not for Sale, with a mission to fight human trafficking worldwide. Human trafficking is the fastest growing illegal industry in the world. It's a $150 billion business annually.
And so we found out in Peru that there were a number of kids living in the streets of Lima. So we started a shelter here. And then we began to go upstream and we said, okay, let's now look for ways we could support the communities where these kids come from in the Amazon region.
Many of these communities are located upriver, 4 or 5 hours away from the nearest city by canoe. They don't have access to so many of the things that we just simply take for granted in the westernized world, like healthcare or education or access to economic opportunity.
A former venture capitalist pulls together a bunch of the smartest people he knows across industries to brainstorm business ideas that can actually create sustainable economic opportunity in this region. The thesis behind this is that when people have economic opportunity, they are less vulnerable to exploitation. Unlike many products with a mission, Rebel is a product of the mission to eradicate the root causes of human trafficking.
We have since evolved into a super herb adaptogenic beverage company that creates over 20 different products. And some of those products actually use the Brazil nuts that we source from these very communities.
Rebel sources Brazil nuts from indigenous communities in Peru, where these communities wild harvest from the Amazon rainforest. After years of having members of their community trafficked and their resources exploited, these communities partnered to form AFIMAD, a collective of Brazil nut harvesters to fight against this exploitation and to claim fair prices.
La castaña es un recurso que tenemos estas 7 comunidades nativas y la economía gira en torno a la castaña, la principal economía.
We were injecting capital in the right places so that they were able to take that capital and do what they needed to do to create a future for themselves.
Brazil nuts are really unique in that they require an intact rainforest to thrive. You can't cultivate them in an orchard or a plantation, and that really incentivizes the protection of the rainforest. The economic success of the Brazil nut really counters the international pressures to convert the rainforest into livestock pastures, mines, and plantations. In essence, the Brazil nut is really one of the few products that helps preserve the rainforest.
Rebel sources over 70 organic ingredients from 30 communities around the world. Each ingredient and each community has its own unique story. Together, these ingredients, these stories create Rebel. This is a chance for us to understand how our purchasing decisions can make an impact. Whether you're a company like Rebel, sourcing ingredients from communities around the world, or just busy on the go and looking for health products at the market.
If we are going to thrive and survive on this planet, we are going to have to make some very serious changes. Consumers need to demand this change. Businesses, stakeholders, shareholders, and others need to drive this change. It is the only way that we will survive.
Okay, so that's the story of Rebel in a nutshell. Oh, a Brazil nutshell. That was unintended. But when I talk about the best talent, it's when you want to then actually make a world-class company. You don't recruit that social worker who has a great heart but always wanted to raise a little bit more money for her community. You try and find world-class executive talent. Now, the hard thing is convincing that person that they've been at Cliff Bar, they've been at Plum from the very early stages. Now you want to bring them into your small company that has a great vision but is still very humble. And I don't know how we convinced Sheryl, but maybe she can tell us how in the world we got you out of retirement.
Well, I don't know about full retirement. I was teaching entrepreneurship over at Sonoma State after I had left Stanford and doing boards. And so Paulo Hawken, who's the co-founder of Rebel, came into my life again. I had met him a long time ago, tried to hire him, couldn't get him to come work for me. And he came back into my life and said, hey, will you join the board of this small adaptogenic company? About $1.5 million company at the time,
Yeah.
a new company. And so I thought, oh, it sounds cool. I knew Dave, so yeah, I'll check this out. So I joined the board, and I started to get to know this company, and I was like, oh my God, this has got some of the specialness that I've seen happen with these other brands, with these other great brands. It had the brand and the product, which were so strong. I mean, how do you find a name like Rebel? What a frigging kick-ass name for a company. Stands for Roots, Extracts, Berries, Barks, and Leaves, by the way. It's what's in the product.
Be a rebel. Don't drink the same old crap everybody else drinks. Being a rebel, right? That's a commercial. Yeah.
Totally. And then the second thing is the people. The people are so passionate. They care so much about the company, put their heart and soul into every minute of the company. And then finally, this purpose. And here I had worked for these companies that, yes, we believe so much in purpose, but we came to it later. And what I began to realize with Rebel, the more I dug into it, the purpose being part of the beginning of the DNA of the company, that is a mind-blowing concept. For me, it was so different because it was in that beginning that you could not pull it out because the company wouldn't be without it. It never had been. And I was blown away by this idea. I mean, a truly blending in some ways of a for-profit and non-for-profit, which starting to call the fourth sector economy. And so when you guys asked me to do an institutional raise for the company, I thought, okay, I'll be an interim CEO, but no friggin' way am I doing this full-time again. I had had enough. And then I just fell so deeply in love, I went in just full force.
And part of that, we do want to talk about transformative leadership, values-led leadership, but part of that challenge is taking that small company, and now it's grown into something quite significant, is keeping those values and keeping that mission at the core. I mean, some examples would be in the articles of incorporation, and I really highly recommend you codify every mission value you want it to be in the future, because later it becomes then a moment of contestation once money gets involved, right? But very early on, we said, okay, every ingredient needs to follow the not-for-sale conduct of Code of Protocol, which means dignity for people and planet. And then we would, obviously map out what that looks like. So Rebel, we would source from ingredients from at-risk communities in the Amazon. Today, we now source in over 30 countries around the world, choosing ingredients based on where we can have the most impact, not where we can find the cheapest ingredient, right? So that's really embedding your supply chain with values. And then we take 2.5% of our net revenue. So every time you buy a bottle of Rebel, let's say 10 cents goes back to a community. Not like if we make a profit or some kind of charity giving. It's at the very core of the company. How do you keep those that's just emblematic of other values. But now you came in, you're going to watch this company grow, but you had the task of making sure that the mission was as important as the financials. And I mean, that's a challenge for any CEO.
Yeah, one of the things, this sounds so simplistic, but I find again and again it's so important, is it is talked about, that you have to talk about it obsessively. Because every time you're putting a new piece together for the company, whether it be a new process or trying to hire a killer head of sales, it so easily falls away from you. Yeah. And so one of the things I did every single solitary time I was in front of the team, whether it be the executive team or the whole company, was to talk about this and to say, this is what this company is about. And this will always be what it's about. So as we're putting together better processes for our accounting system, we also have to put together processes as to how do we make sure that we're even better understanding what is happening with our growers on the ground. We're doing it from afar because we couldn't afford to do it on the ground, But then with the Brazil nuts, we had to do it on the ground because we had to create the processes so that we could really understand and authentically talk to what we were trying to do to help people in terms of social justice. And I cannot even tell you, I'd sit at night and be like, everyone is so freaking sick of me talking about this stuff. They've got to not want to hear from me again. But then I'd wake up in the next morning and realize, oh my God, this thread got away from me. Wait a minute, I got to pull it back in, thread it into the fabric so the fabric gets stronger and stronger.
You know, the current CEO of LinkedIn, I had lunch with him recently, and he said, you know, you get so tired of repeating your values.
Yes.
And you feel like, okay, everybody's heard it, but if, as a leader, get sick of your message.
Yes.
Right? If you're not saying it enough. And it's something you lose because you want to say something fresh, unique.
Yeah.
You go, I feel like I'm just beating the drum. But you almost have to because there's people at different stages of evolution in the company, right?
Totally. And I think that's a really good point, Dave, because what I've also found is, and we'll talk about the new ventures I'm working on now, but every single time I think I'm being so clear. Have you had this experience like a million times? You think you were so clear, and then you realize when you talk to people, what have you heard? And it's something completely different even than what you intended. So to me, I always thought of every time I spoke as, okay, I'm getting ready for another focus group. How is this message landing? Is it at the intention of what I'm trying to get at? And how can I do it better next time? So I think that's so important.
You know, it's fun. We love being together, but we've had tense moments, you know, believe it or not. I'm on the board, and I'm the mission keeper, as it were. I stand for not for sale on that board, even though I want it to be financially super successful. And Sheryl really was a big believer in the mission, but you know, they're being pushed in all kinds of different ways operationally and by the financial. So one rule we had was we couldn't email each other firebombs. Have you ever done that? Is that it's easier because it's hard to tell someone you're upset.
Right.
One-on-one, right? It's easier just to throw an email out. You go, I did it. You know? So, but what I was struck by, Sheryl, is that what you brought into Rebel was not just that belief that you can do a double bottom line, but also that the personal is the corporate and the public. Mm-hmm. Personal is the political. And you've written a lot about that. If you haven't read Sheryl's book, go out and buy 4 copies and give 3 away. I don't have any interest in that. But yeah, talk a little bit about that, because that's such an important part of your journey, but you live it out.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I think sometimes when I talk about this stuff, people think I'm kind of crazy, but I renamed my title. Instead of Chief Executive Officer, I became the Chief Love Officer of Rebel. And I'd have people that would look at my title and be like, okay, that is really weird. And even my kids said to me, like, Mom, I kind of get what you're doing, but I don't know, that just, love belongs in your family. It doesn't really belong in business. And my point was, like, I fought this really hard not giving this up, not giving this title up, because to me, love is about belonging. It's about feeling like this is a place where you are welcome, you are heard, where your voice matters. And to me, when I bring love to work, I bring my best self to work. Because what, at the end of the day, are we? We're human beings. And at our core is love. If we don't have love, we die. And so if I'm not walking into Rebel every single day with love completely on my sleeve and out there in everything that I do, I'm losing part of myself that I can give to people. And by the way, when I come home at night, I get regenerated by the love that I get from my family, and I bring that right into work. And if you do read my book, I learned this really hard way. I mean, I lost my health. I developed anorexia around what I was doing with work. And I was like, I slammed me to the bottom of my soul, and I said, I got to do this really friggin' differently. Yeah. And so that's what Chief Love Officer.
And you did. You know what? Also, you know, not only the title, which was, you know, probably when private equity got involved, they're like, what? You know?
Right.
But the other aspect of that was the vulnerability you just showed, and you did in your book. To bring that into a board meeting is refreshing. I don't know what kind of boards you serve on, but it's almost like no one wants to show a crack in their armor.
Yeah.
And you know, what I really appreciated with Sheryl, it's like someone would bring up an idea, or she goes, "What does that mean?" Like, I'm not sure what you mean when you say that, but showing like, yeah, I don't know everything, which a CEO is not commonly doing. But I just really, that empowered me to be just more vulnerable. Just to say, what do you mean when you say that particular acronym, which probably if I should know if I'm a venture, I should know it, but I don't pretend I don't. So I really, I never told you that, by the way.
No, you didn't.
I wanted to wait till I was in front of 150.
That's so nice, Dave.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Well, it's back at you as having investors that kind of get that and are willing to go there with you. I had one of our partners in this, or one of our investors, Dwayne. I with the group Bigger, BIGR. I talk to him every week, not because he's my investor, he's a board member, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And one of the things that we started doing with each other is, we just said, we're both old enough, we don't care anymore. Let's be completely vulnerable and honest with each other. And, he would bring up to me his background and where he came from and kind of personal struggles that he had with the whole concept of money, because he didn't grow up with money. And that really helped to bond us on, core values for the company. But it also feels like when you're vulnerable, the company benefits, because one of the things that we forget about on boards and with investors is that we're all here for the same thing. We're all here to support the growth of the company. And there's so much animosity, and Dave, you really bring this in droves, but there's so much animosity typically between an investor and a CEO to protect yourself that you're not even helping each other as partners. And shame on all of us for creating these relationships that are so much animosity that we can't sit down and say, I'm really scared right now. The numbers are not coming in as I want to. Yeah. Help me. I'm a CEO. I need help. But yet we're so afraid to do that. And for an investor to say, like, I don't know what the answer is, but let me give you the resources to do that. And you know what? I'm not going to fire you because you just told me the numbers are bad. Yeah. Wow, what a freaking concept.
Yeah, that doesn't happen a lot, I don't think, The other thing, okay, it also struck me through this whole process that justice is what love looks like when it goes public. And the reason I want to throw that out there is because the way I started this process of starting companies to bring about a better world, I went to one of the largest apparel retailers in the United States, has its headquarters in San Francisco. So that narrows it down. I'm not going to name them, but I went to the head of their sourcing and manufacturing worldwide, and I pointed out the fact that they have deplorable conditions where they're manufacturing their clothes in Bangladesh and other places. And really, as not-for-sale representative, the head of not-for-sale, I was saying, you need to change your dignity, because this is important not just to you morally, but as consumers. I mean, this is a corporate deal, not just an individual moral deal. But he said, your problem, Dave? I went, whoa, wow, okay, now it's my problem. Is that you are coming here begging me to change the way that we operate. If you had your own company, you could just do whatever you wanted. You wouldn't have to come beg me. Okay, one aspect was like, oh, I can't believe you just told me that. Okay. But the other aspect was, okay, I'm going to prove that, right? So I think it's incumbent upon us is also we need to show the models that work. It's possible to have a heart and have love, but also have justice in our company. So since I last saw you, some of you, I got involved in another company called Relocity. Imagine velocity, but relocity. And my goal was, how do we create a world where people who are in such movement and mobility because of wars, because of poverty, they are in such mobility, but they are at risk. As soon as you lose your community, you lose your base, your home, you become vulnerable to being taken advantage of. So how can what if I got the biggest companies in the world to pay for that? Facebook, Netflix, Nike, Disney. And the way I'll do that is I'll say, look, I'll help your hires, your people who you're hiring and working with, I'll help take care of them in mobility if you'll give me money to take care of these people in mobility. And they bought into it. So we take care of all the new hires for Netflix and Facebook and Google, and soon we're going to help all their employees with their mobility needs. But you can see, it's like, how do you tie these together? But when I wrote the contract this time, I said, okay, in perpetuity, as long as this company stands, this is what we'll stand for. $1 out of every 100 that gets paid to us will go to these people who can't afford it. That's just as written as love. You know what I'm saying? If you don't codify it, it becomes an emotion, and you know what happens to an emotion when complicated things get involved. So I know this is the direction you're moving with your movement Jedi, is how do you make both love and justice real? And perhaps you could share that evolution. After leaving Rebel, this is what you wanted to do.
Yeah, so, all of you, as we think about our careers over time, it's kind of hard to not think about what am I doing in this moment. And, maybe I'm a serial entrepreneur, but also a serial like wanting to do a new idea and move things forward in a bigger and bigger way. And when I was at Rebel and so inspired by what you created and knowing this is where things need to move.
Yes.
There needs to be a blending between for-profit and non-for-profit because it's not working the way it is on either side. It's not working. And so as I was thinking about Rebel, I'd been doing it for 4 years, and I thought, I really want to use what I've been so inspired by and what I've learned and how this can work in business to take it onto a bigger platform. So I've been in the natural products industry forever. And I started to realize, there was a lot of work being done in the natural products industry around climate. And hey, we need to be a leader as an industry in reversing global warming. And given that agriculture is such a huge part of what is causing global warming, we need to be an industry that's taking the lead on it. And one of the things that I realized in being part of this is, well, wait a minute, we're missing part of the equation here. You cannot address global warming unless you're addressing the social justice side of it. Take, for example, our growers that are working around the world. They're the people that are most vulnerable to climate change. And when climate change impacts people on the ground where their whole livelihood is based on farming, and then they can't farm, they become so much more vulnerable to trafficking. And by the way, these are people that are really in the canary in the coal mines in terms of what's happening. I know, having my house burned down 2 years ago, and then again, my house being close to where the fire is just now, up in Sonoma County. And so this is real. These two things are inextricably linked as environmental and social justice. So started feeling like, hey, we got to do something about this in our industry, because individual companies like Rebel, that's great, but there's not enough momentum there to be able to create movement. And here, as I was leaving Rebel, I thought, oh, should I go into politics? Should I do something like that and create some of this movement? And I thought, well, wait a minute. What I know, my experience is, my talent is, my passion is in this natural products industry. So why don't I use this platform to start to create a movement? So we just launched an initiative called the Jedi Collaborative. It stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And the whole idea there is, let's move an industry. And what really strikes me in this whole thing as I'm starting to work on this is, if you even put all the justice and the love and all of that kind of stuff on the side, we have to do this. Yeah. I mean, we have a country that is over 50% women. In 25 years will be majority people of color. The minority will be the majority. And yet, our companies and our leadership and our executive teams and throughout our companies are not representing consumers. Now, does this make any sense? Seriously, what did Black Panther just do? It is the third highest grossing movie in North American history, ahead of the Titanic. Why? Well, because it was a great action movie, but it was completely empathic to the experience of the African American community, using an African American director, using an African American cast. That is how you create a modern company. Yeah. To me, the business case at the end of the day is if that was the only reason we need to do this.
Yeah. Well, a big part, and I realize I'm in a room of people who have done a lot of great things in their life. They're leaders in their own communities, and they've been a part of this transformation. And one thing that we challenge each other is how do we keep bringing this to the next generation, but not in a kind of, I'm on a mountaintop, let them come and I'll speak to them, but actually getting involved and getting engaged with young entrepreneurs. And so this is such a critical moment for leaders here like us to get involved in companies. I'm really lucky. My son's over here. You can wave Zach over in the back. He's my founder of Z Shoes with me. We didn't name it after Z Zach, but that's a whole other story. But, basically, Z Shoes is a better idea. I mean, all the shoes that we have, most of us, in my closet and the ones I have on right now, they're going to be in a garbage dump in 4 generations because they're toxic. They're not recyclable. They're made out of materials that... Z Shoes, it's made out of sustainable organic materials. They're so vegan you could eat them, all right? So,
and they're cool looking.
Yeah. That's like, Rocky, I'm so proud you have them on. But we have to make fashion companies. We have to make food companies. We have to make tech companies. But I had Zach speak to my MBA students at the university the other day, and I didn't script that. They were asking me, said, hey, well, what would you recommend for us as we start our companies? And he goes, okay, I know he's my pops, but you need to get someone like him on your team, right? He can go to bat for you in ways that I can't as a young entrepreneur. He can give you a warning sign when things are coming, and that's the role that I'm not his boss, I'm his colleague, and I'm on the phone with him, all the time and texting. But we need you in the room to be engaged there. It's not enough just to go to a conference. It's not enough to just, be a part of a consultant. We need you in the dirt with us. Yeah. And that's what it's going to take. Because these young entrepreneurs cannot do it alone. Because they're trying to create these companies that are unique and are redesigning the world. They got a lot of competition and they get a lot of opposition. I know you're finding the same thing with the Jedi community, right?
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, Dave, because that is like, I guess what I realize now in my second retirement is that, I can't help myself, I keep jumping back into something, but that the more we grow in our careers, the more it's almost, how do we use that privilege for what we've all experienced in our career to make sure that we're moving this next generation forward, whether it be at an industry level, whether it be in an individual level. But all of you in this room, like, what a freaking awesome group of talent here. Imagine if every single one of us stepped up and said, I'm going to do something about this, and I know many of you are, but this is our time. Yeah. Some of the young people might look and say, you're over there. You don't know the experience. And yes, we do. And we can help them and we can learn from them. Now is our time.
Yeah. No, I really believe that. I guess part of that challenge is I heard Rocky, we were at an event a month ago, and he gave this great E.B. White quote, I'm caught between savoring the world and saving the world. Right? And you get to, there is a moment that I really want to savor the world, right? But also the impulse to do something with all that I've been given, right? The wealth of experience. So I think E.B. White answered that by saying, you can't save the world unless you savor it too. So I don't think it's either or. But there is a moment, and I like that because I think there is this myth that there is a young generation that says, you're too old, get out of here. I have so many young people in my life who say, would you please help me work through this, right? They're looking for partners. They're looking for colleagues, not someone to tell them what to do, but to be a partner, and I just feel like it is our time, and I love that.
Yeah, and for even to be, for me, when I look at my kids and I share with them some of the things that I'm doing, and for them to say, wow, you know what? These generations can do something together. And I was just so struck by all the things that are going on in terms of, climate and Gretchen saying, hey, your generation killed us. What are you going to do? And for her to see a different model from all of us to be able to step forward and say we can do something. We can help in this process. And for us to inspire them as much as they're inspiring us.
Yeah, you know, I guess in my house, you don't get dinner if you don't start a company. And so Zach's older sister, Jade, we're starting a company, but inspired by the young 15-year-olds are saying, you know what, the world's in a bad place. You got to do something about climate change. Like, what can we... And that's hard. It's frustrating, right? And so walking through that, you think, okay, I recycle. That's not empowering. Maybe I take more public transport. Am I doing something? So Jade, my daughter and I decided we just launched a company in London where we're going to change the way that we think about the future of energy. Right now, most companies who are even considering, mostly in Europe, not the U.S., how do we create a carbon offset, right? So I consider it a guilt tax. I buy a carbon offset and now I'm good.
Right.
But how do you take that to another level where I'm feeling, no, I'm actually investing in the future? Well, if you think about it, if I own a geothermal or a solar energy plant and it's creating clean energy, I de facto am putting more oxygen in the atmosphere. I'm not putting any carbon. That's better than paying off a carbon credit, wherever that might be. So we're going out, we're buying electricity, clean electricity, and we're going to give companies the opportunity to invest in it. So what a great thing. Would you rather buy an annual carbon credit, which is an expense, or would you rather invest in a electricity factory where you're actually going to own it, and for years forward, you are creating more positive oxygen than negative carbon? All right, but this is for the future. I want to be able to sell a kilowatt hour of energy to a 15-year-old girl and say, you now own part of the future. And I'm going to give you a dividend every quarter because you're owning it. Investing in that future rather than paying off the burden of the past. So how do we make this a hopeful thing? Because what I want to do is people are inspired by hope, not by guilt. So how do we create companies that are inspired by hope? You're the master of this.
I am.
You really are. So what is it how do you inspire that hope in teams and in entrepreneurs?
Well, I think at the end of the day, people as human beings, we want to believe in something greater than ourselves. And, it's funny because I look at my husband who's worked for big corporations his whole career, and he can, at the end of the day, talk about, well, it's really hard to convince most people in the company to care to do it to make somebody else more money. And, granted, for our smaller companies, our people, if we're doing things right, have a financial stake in everything. But still, they have to believe in something bigger than themselves. And so to help people understand as part of the team that they are creating a legacy by being part of their company. I always talk about it that, do you realize when I sit down with someone, your fingerprints are on this company and they will be forever. And forever, the people at Rebel will know that I helped fight human trafficking. I helped co-create a future without human trafficking. I mean, my God, what a motivating, inspiring way to come to work every day.
Yeah.
Really?
And we actually did after you left, we did a third-party verification, why people are working at Rebel. More than salary, it was that. The number one thing was because I'm fighting human trafficking. Even though I'm working on spreadsheets, I'm working with sales, whatever I'm doing, but it's also a part of so, our moment has come, but it's because we don't believe enough in that vision that we don't start creating and running companies with that vision, because that's the future. The 15-year-olds of the year are telling us we're not listening.
Right.
But this is business advice. It's not just, the Trumpites of the world, are trying to convince you that she's just a, autistic, out of touch, whatever, low agenda. At the end of the day, that is our agenda, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was speaking of politics, not that we want to go there, but I was in this session with Governor Newsom is trying to put together, I don't know if anyone is aware of this, but he has become convinced that this blending that you have done for a while of for-profit and non-for-profit, which again they're calling the four-sector group, a four-sector economy, that this blending is actually what we need in order to close the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Sustainable Development Goals, the gap between fulfilling those goals and not. And he is convinced that this kind of economy is what we need, and wants to have, his vision is to see California as being the state that's driving this change. And it started, and we were just talking about this actually at lunch today, is how do you even think about this a step further and differently? For example, it can't be, it's going to be really hard to convince people that at the end of the day, if you're not going to drive a strong, profitable growth at all times, that it's going to be, that you can make a lot of trade-offs. It's just how I've been banging my head against the wall trying to decide, hey, is this really possible for companies to make this trade-off? I'm not sure if it is. But if you can provide other incentives, for example, tax breaks. If you could provide tax breaks by fourth sector group companies, then it becomes a little bit more palatable. So how do we start to change completely the model in the way we're doing business now?
I really love experimenting with these things and seeing, I guess my goal is to be smarter every week. Thank God I didn't give this presentation last week because I'm on it today. But when I look at the funding models, I'm like so soured on venture capitalists right now or outside institutional investors. All my companies, I'm doing angel investors. Even if up to I just raised $5.5 million, all angel investors.
That's amazing.
Now, logic tells you that's not the way to go. And people say, oh, you'll never be successful when you want to exit, or there's all these reasons. But at the end of the day, they're scripts for someone who doesn't believe in your values to own your company. And so how do we change that?
Yes.
Is it possible? I'll let you know with velocity. Can we take angel investors all the way to the end with Z shoes, so I want to think differently, but it requires experimentation. Does it work? Probably fail sometimes. That's okay. It makes you move forward more quickly, right? So it's rethinking and redesigning, but this is the moment to do that because people know things aren't working, but they just are not sure what would work.
Yes.
And it's being willing to take those risks.
Yes.
By the way, I'm going to have she's going to comment on that, and then we're going to have your questions. Yeah. Did you want to say anything to that?
No, I'm saying yes.
Okay. All right. Are there people, because I like to bring you into the conversation. I have so much fun talking to her, and I get to do it all the time. Maybe you want to also talk to us. So are there things that you would like to either pursue, questions, comments? Would love to have you a part of this fireside chat. We got a guy right here, and we also have a microphone.
Yep,
Coming.
Oh, and then we have some over here after that. So let's, we'll race here, and then okay, so you're first, I point it, and then David, you're next.
Hi, Dan Garcia. Thanks for your comments. My wife, Kirsten, and I, she's somewhere in the crowd here, we formed a benefit corporation. And it sounds very much like what you're describing with the four-sector economy. And this isn't so much a question as just making a comment or an observation that it is inspiring to hear that there's some consideration being given to tax breaks for businesses that are in the space of having a social cause, because as a California benefit corporation, that is in fact, social cause or some sort of a purpose is actually written into our articles of incorporation. And it seems as though a tax benefit might be a way to further that movement of the benefit corporations to try and incentivize businesses to go in that direction. So similar to what you're describing, benefit corporation is a for-profit business.
Yep.
A lot of people hear a benefit corporation, they think that means non-profit. But what Kirsten and I do whenever we have the opportunity to educate people on what a benefit corporation is kind of inform them about that legal entity that has those purposes that written into the articles, and that's every decision that's made is consistent with those values. So that was more just a comment I wanted to make, and glad to hear that there's movement in that direction.
Well, and that's Rebels actually is also a B Corp, and so is Plum, and I think that's such an important comment because that movement, that whole movement to make that happen, it now is legally binding, so that if your shareholders wanted to sue you over selling to someone just because of profit, that's legal. And that's legal not only in California, that's legal in Delaware, where most companies are incorporated. So it's a very powerful tool to help to create this kind of movement. And you're right, that's exactly what the fourth sector economy is about. So thank you.
David?
Hi, David Worley, DU, University of Denver. Thanks to you both. You guys were both inspiring and visionary, so that's awesome. Maybe I'm the only one in the room that has not heard this before, but if you wouldn't mind, would you talk a little bit more about what a four-sector economy is and tie it back to how this goes to kind of your investment and hope thesis that was kind of throughout your talk here?
Yeah. You want me
Go
to
ahead
start,
first.
Matt?
And then
Okay. Yeah, it's exactly, another way to describe it is a for-benefit corporation, and definitely encourage you to, look, if you're familiar with B Corporation. I don't know why they're calling it a four-sector economy. If you look up four-sector group, I think it's called .org, they talk about the STGs and all of that kind of stuff that I just talked about. But again, this is where I hadn't heard before really government starting to say, hey, wait a minute, this is huge for the economies to start really embracing this model and making it real and making it really viable and drawing attention to it. So I think it really started with some of this movement with B Corporation finally becoming to be legally, but there's some really great stuff written about this right now. So I'm glad you're embracing. Would love to have you talk to your students more about that. That's great.
And David, spice of life is unpredictability. You won't predict that I'm going to say this, but I'm not so sure I believe in B Corps. So this is, and so Z Shoes is not a B Corp. Well, what do you mean? Say, well, I want to put into the very articles of incorporation in the DNA the values that you have, so that when an investor comes, you say, here's the articles of incorporation. Why? I'm afraid that we ghettoize ourselves. So that, these companies over here, they do commerce. These companies, they kind of do good in their kind of business. I want to be able to walk in, I want to put the shoe on the other foot. Now when someone goes, well, what kind of companies do you have? And I describe our social mission, and you should talk to our philanthropy group. They might fund you. I'd like to switch it around and say, you're with a private equity. So what are you doing for People and Planet this year? Like, they're not on the back foot. I'm on the back foot for justifying myself as a legitimate investor. Now, okay, I like B Corps, by the way. I just want to throw a little bit of a spice into this, that it's not as straightforward as we might think, and there are consequences that might be unintended. So at the end of the day, though, I look for angel investors, and they put anywhere from like $50,000 to $1 million. They believe in that model that you can put values at the core of a company and do well. People buy Rebel because they love the product. They don't buy it because it's a charity in the form of a company. Yeah. Right? They buy Z Shoes because they look good. As much as I've tried to sell them on the vegan, you can eat them. Okay, it doesn't work. They're biodegradable. Oh, you mean they're going to fall apart when I walk? Okay, it doesn't work. They look cool. Oh, I want to buy a pair. I love those. I'm saying, at the end of the day, we're doing business. My intentions, my values, hopefully that also seeps into the company and also the long-term vision of the company and why it's attractive. But at the end of the day, I think you can't just legislate goodness. You got to make something goodness that's compelling, that people want to be a part of that story.
Yeah, and I'll also just build on that to say, too, that's why this Jedi Collaborative, which is actually a nonprofit, influencing a for-profit industry, I think is so important because we have got to change the makeup of our leadership. And, thankfully, millennials and younger are starting to really believe this, that there has to be a different way to run companies. It's not working. And the more people that we get that are in leadership that get that, it's going to become natural versus trying to force this every time. We're of a generation that is forcing it. Yeah. You can't force it anymore.
And I'm aware there's some people in the room, they're back with the large apparel company in San Francisco that told me it's my problem. It's harder to get those big companies to shift, particularly when you're looking at quarterly reports and you've got that financial pressure. And I see this hand over here. We'll get a mic to this woman. So I guess, you have one already. So I guess part of I just want to acknowledge, and I want to address this at some point before we walk off this stage. What if you're at a big company? It's like a Rebel, we could steer it in a way because we were the founders in that way. But what about if you're at a huge company? How do you turn that ship?
And I think it's the consumer. I mean, look
Yes.
at Marvel, the Black Panther. That's a great example. The consumer is demanding it. And as companies start to realize it's not only just, buying the product, but it's also consumers who are saying, I want these values to be part of this company. Yeah. They're going to force big companies
more than
to
anything.
change.
You're absolutely right. More than anything, you're absolutely right. Go ahead. Yep. Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead. You have anything right over here.
Thanks. Jim Selman from Ojai, California. There's sort of a two-sided thing here. One is the issue of time. I think many would agree that climate is at least an emergency, and I think it's probably true of many of these other intractable issues. How do you feel? How do you build that reality of urgency and timeliness into the kind of work that you're doing? And the flip side of that is, or a related issue, is the two other players in the game are philanthropy and government. And the degree to which you've been able to integrate the profit world and change the mindset of the investors, what possibilities do you have or do you see for changing the mindset of philanthropy and also government?
No, excellent points both. The challenge of philanthropy and government is that they have created bureaucracies to prevent them from acting quickly, right? And so there's an advantage to that and there's a disadvantage. And when you're an entrepreneur, waiting for the process to unfold itself, but you're trying to get investment from a philanthropy or from a government, very difficult. Now, Elon Musk, he's been able to be a genius at getting government money, right? He's telling the world he's got a great consumer brand. Meanwhile, he's getting all this government money that provides him with non-equity investment to build his infrastructure. Kudos to the guy. I wish I could do that, right? But the challenge is to get philanthropy to act more quickly. And the urgency is why I feel this way. It's the urgency of the problems, but it's also the urgency of creating these companies. Once you start a company, you got to move quickly, right? And say, yeah, we're going to look at it. We'll take it to the board in 3 months. Then there's the investment committee. They meet in January. Now you're into a year and you've got short-term capital needs. So it's a challenge. It really is. Although I will say that I have more luck convincing people that the money they now give to philanthropy, they should be investing it in more scalable models like Rebel than I do saying, hey, I know you invest in cloud-based software. I've got a Rebel. They say, well, I don't want to mix my values and it's a very funny psychological and emotional process. So I think that's also evolving, how people interpret and understand their investments.
And it's interesting, too, to totally agree with everything you're saying. And it just struck me as I was listening to you, too, I just think about the fact that, again, just having these fires come here. And as this stuff starts to, this stuff being global warming, starts to truly impact us here, it becomes personal. And you talked about this earlier. And then the personal inevitably becomes part of business because, hey, your CEO, their house almost burned down. All of a sudden, you actually get it a little bit more. Your house almost burned down. You're going to get it a little bit more. So I think that's also what's coming together at a very unique time for us here.
Yeah. I will say the Dutch government has taken its foreign aid, which we call Agency for International Development, USAID. It has taken its foreign aid, 50% of it now is into companies which you call fourth sector, and 50% is more traditional channels of, say, economic development. And so they're testing and moving with that. I have not been able to find that kind of creativity among U.S. government officials as of yet. I've tried. But, it's, again, making things work. Right? I really do believe, in failing quick. Because then you know it's not going to work. You're not going to waste time and resources on it. And I think that's it, is the risk. Those institutions aren't built for failure. We might fail, but man, we'll learn so much. It's not what they want to hear. Where an angel investor who's been in the capital world, they understand risk investment in a different way. So I don't want to sugarcoat my pitch to them because it's a risk investment. I mean, Rebel, who would have thought it would become what it became? But at the same time, I believe it's the way forward. It's a really important question and I appreciate it. Yes?
Thank you so much. My name is Sabine Gromer. I'm the founder of a company called Magnolia Tree. And I'm actually, my heart is really pounding because I find you very inspiring, and yet what I'm going to say is I'm going to challenge the statement you just made. And I really want to raise the topic of tax breaks in this room. And I think this is why I'm so nervous. I worked in finance. I should give that as a context. I had a very successful career in finance in all the financial hubs of the world. So I know the industry very well. I know the argument very well. And I personally have a problem with tax breaks. So if you are a for-profit organization and you have a tax break, in my book, what you actually do is you do not take up your social responsibility. Because taxes are actually used to help people in the countries that you operate in. I'm German as well. Maybe I should say that for disclosure. I also find that, when you speak of the fourth sector, I understand that there is a need to, attract more people into this space. And I do understand that a lot of good can come from this. But there's an inherent conflict for me with a tax break and being in that sector. Because on the one hand, you have a contract to support whatever cause and purpose you believe in. And then on the other hand, you do not give back. So any comments would be really helpful. But I just felt so strongly to share that because I think you both are operating and working in energy fields where you have a lot of influence. And I think that topic really bears a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. This is part of what El Jedi is all about, is getting these different perspectives on it. You are way more of an expert than I am. So honestly, I can't say whether tax breaks are or are not the right solution. I think that's where the discussion needs to happen. And for all of us to get together and have these kind of robust conversations to figure it out, what is so important. And again, I'm not part of being part of this conversation with Gavin Newsom's office is, good for him. He is pulling together people from academia, nonprofits, and for-profits to have this conversation and determine what the best way forward is. So, yeah, right on. I don't know what the right answer is. That's awesome.
There is a vehicle called social impact bonds, which tend to, they try to tie metrics around social results to, say, return on investment. And if I look at I don't know what it is right now, but look at Rebel. Not for Sale was helping 85 children in a shelter in Lima, and the reason we started Rebel was how do we scale our impact? How do we go upstream so these kids, mostly from the Amazon, don't end up in a shelter being protected from being in the sex industry, being exploited as young kids. So if we look at today, we estimated the other day, we looked at Rebel's impact from all the farmers we're working with. We're working with an aggregate of 22,000 people because of the way we source. That's economic and social benefits that are coming to them. We were helping 85 kids. So look at the scale of that just within 5-6 years. So how does that become recognized as, if you're creating all those jobs, you're creating all that economic platform, how does that benefit the common good? And should there be some kind of benefit to those companies over and against those who are doing nothing to contribute to their local community, right? So it's all about the free market dispensing goodness. I don't know what the answers are here are. And I know you and I could probably have the rest of the day conversations about that. And I look forward to those kinds of experiments and conversations, what really works. Because we're all there, but we need better mechanisms. The world's changing so quickly, we need to rethink the vehicles that got us here. Totally. Because those cars ain't taking us where we want to go.
Sheryl, David, we have time for one more question from Alita.
So it's not really a question, but it's a little bit of a follow-up of just happening. I just heard yesterday one of my colleagues saying some of the biggest, fastest growing sex trafficking is in Oakland. Yeah. It's right here. Yeah. And the point being is, people are not moved to do things that don't burn down their house. And so this whole idea of legislating goodness or any of these things, people have to see that, for example, if it's more possible to have innovation if you have more different kind of voices in the room. Nobody's interested in changing. At Stanford, they're not getting ready to change nothing. It's working perfectly just like it is. I always say inclusion and diversity programs are being legislated and handed down by the same people who have benefited from it being exactly the way it's always been. And so I'm not inspired to stand up and say anything because me just standing up alone, I'm standing up here because I have the privilege of being here. But that's what I don't understand. And also, the thing about like people adopting little black children in Ethiopia, there's black children here who don't have a home. There's people here who don't eat. My rent is almost it is too expensive for me to be living in the Bay Area. And people are not interested. That's why this partisan conversation is so powerful, because right here, people are like, sounds good. No.
Yeah.
What can we do about that? Because until we help what's at home, what's across the street, what's across the bay, what's right here, I don't think it's going to move at all. I don't, because as I said, and I appreciate my job at Stanford, I'm not saying anything about that. I'm saying it's not motivated. Why should it move fast? It moves very slow. Why should it move any faster than it moves? It's working perfectly. Just the way, you were at Stanford? Just the way it is. Yeah. Just, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I just don't, that's the problem. And so then that conversation, people go, well, how can it change? That's why people don't vote, because it looks like it's not going to change for the people who really need it at home.
Yeah.
Here. People, lined all along Stanford now are trailers. Some of those people work at Stanford. They live in trailer parks. Live in the RV.
No.
Okay, how do we fix here?
No.
Just asking.
Well, that's another long day conversation that I'd love to have.
Yeah, really.
But just to, throw another unpredictable comment out here, is that I don't think change will come when enough white folks decide that the world's bad enough they should do something about it because they feel bad. I'm just sorry. We, all of us who are privileged, need to participate. But we also have to be handing power, like real power, to local communities that they can choose their own future. And that's a bigger challenge, right? So what does that look like so that people start demanding their own sense of purpose and destiny? How do we bring that into the mix, that we democratize the design of the future rather than hand it to people? And I guess that's the big challenge, right? So well, that's exactly what I think is the potential of this room here. We got people with strong voices, and the question you're saying, who are we speaking with? Who's that voice going to? And I think it's a great challenge.
Well, and I would say too that it was funny, just a car ride here, I also started this Women on Boards project, or people who experience gender oppression. And we were talking about, as part of our goal, eventually we want 50% of boards in the natural products industry to be women, which it should be, because women are 50% of the population, or more than 50%. But next year, we're asking companies, just put one more woman or person who's been experienced gender oppression on your board. And I was just talking to someone, and they said, well, it's with one woman, it's just, you're just talking and nobody's listening. And so what we have to do, we have to get more than one woman, of course. Each piece of it is going to help. So 1 year asking one more is going to make a difference. And I'm saying that because we have to start to get more people from marginalized communities and in local marginalized communities to be part of these companies and part of the leadership. And we need to be willing to say, all these old networks that we've used to find people are not the right places to look anymore. There is so much talent out there, but we don't tap into it because they're not part of our network. So how do we do that so we can truly address these issues? I don't know what the answer is, but we've got to change it. That's why I want to do this initiative. I want to understand it. I want to talk to the people that experience it on the ground and say, how do we change this? We have to. We can't give up. It's part of the institution of what we're doing. We're all bad actors. It's not about bad actors, but we're all bad actors, every single one of us, because we're part of these institutions that we've created through hundreds of years that have taken us all down. So I don't know what the answer is, but thank you for saying that.
So it's a call to be a badass, I guess. I really appreciate, that you're one. And it's great that Sheryl would come and join us. Young Zach over here is going to, if you've been following the Z-Shoe story, it'd be great to connect with him. He'll be over there for a little while. This is the future, right? And so I really do appreciate the fact that we're thinking about, well, who should be at the table for designing that future? How do we make it something that, not that it's something we do for you, but we're doing with you because you're at the table. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be at your table. Appreciate it.
Thank you.